Welcome to our podcast.
Hello, Nicole.
We're happy to have you here. So you are a very accomplished scientist and an entrepreneur. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're working on today?
Sure. So my background is kind of diverse. I started off as a photographer many years ago, but then went into school and studied science. I am a scientist. I've worked for 3 decades plus as a research scientist, and about 8 years ago, I started a company called Genetic Networks, founded that company with a great team of scientists, including Nobel Prize winner Lee Hartwell, who I think was on this show at one time before. And since then, we've basically grown the company into a really interesting company. It's been bootstrapped, no VCs, but it's done well, and it's profitable. And now we're looking at the blockchain space to see how we can bridge these for-profit companies to decentralized treasuries.
That's very interesting. So what are you working on specifically regarding blockchain?
Regarding blockchain, well, to be honest, blockchain for me is sort of like an idea. And I learned about this about a year ago when I first met some of the members of your team. And over this past year, I've really done a deep dive into blockchain and what it's all about. And for me, it really represents a wallet that could be shared by many, many people, millions of people potentially. And this is very exciting to me because it allows people to have power over the currency they own to actually do things they need rather than relying on the whims of an industry that doesn't always want to do exactly what the people want. They'd rather do things for their own shareholders. And I really wanted to get around that. So what I've been doing personally in Web3 is very little, other than sort of bringing people together and getting the experts in Web3 to seriously consider building out a framework around a DAO in order to bring medicine. That was our first goal, bring medicines that we need. Obviously, the pandemic taught us that we need medicines to protect us from dying if an infection was to hit. But I'm now expanding that concept to try to reach all the essentials that are needed for life. So we're going for water, food, shelter, and medicine. Those are the four, I think, arguably those are the four main essentials that we need in order for people to survive on this planet. And I think that we have a responsibility to try to get there.
That's very interesting. So how did you come to start this project in the last year? You mentioned these 4 resources that are very much needed and these 4 pillars that are very much needed to have life. How did you come to that conclusion and what motivated you to pursue it?
Well, it's kind of twofold. About 10 years ago, I had a long conversation with a walk with Lee Hartwell, who I find one of the most inspiring people I know. And we talked about the future. We talked about what is going to happen in the future with this AI and technology, et cetera, and robots and all these things that will take the place of humans. And our conclusion, we may be wrong, is that there is enough capital, ultimately if this is an efficient system as we're being told it will be, to provide for people what they actually need in order to survive. And then, of course, if you want more, you would then go and do something, build something, build a company or whatever you want to do with your time that you now have, and you have free time. So that was a basic idea that stuck in my head for about 10 years. And then it was really triggered again when I was in Cape Town, South Africa, and I walked the streets there with my trusty camera, and I found homeless people that actually don't have any of the essentials. And it was very heart-wrenching, and also they were not people that had lost their minds or something. These were actually educated, talented individuals that I could really have a good conversation with. And that's when I realized I needed to step this up and actually build it out, not just for medicine, but for everything these people actually need. And that's really where the motivation came from. And that was only a couple weeks ago where I really was triggered to move in this direction.
And talking about South Africa, how do you see these technologies helping out emerging markets and the citizens that lack those resources and those pillars?
Yeah, so I think emerging markets start from giving people food and water. It's really hard to be creative if you're hungry. I think anybody would agree to that. So So my mind is sort of made up on this, that if we were able to provide a DAO treasury that could fuel for-profit companies to bring the essentials of life to these people, we might find we have the next Rembrandt or the next writer in those communities. We just don't know it yet. And they might be inspired to actually learn at that point. And I think the next stage of this would be education, where I know quite a bit about, because I was an educator for many, many years, and Lee Hartwell also dedicated his life to education for children. So I think these things are layers. It's like you start from the basic essentials, and then as you work up, you get towards emerging markets. So in other words, yes, there are really creative people in Africa, as there are anywhere in the world, and you need to bring them out of their, find their true potential somehow. And I think the first step is to actually feed them, if that's needed. But later, you would hope that that would lead to a discovery of some kind in those populations. And there's actually precedents for this, which is really exciting. When I was in Africa, I learned that there was a group of people that built a macadamia nut farm, 30 hectares, where they used the people in the indigenous community to build that farm. And now they're all making, very good salaries. And they're empowered, right? You're about empowering community. So that's what this is about. It's like really trying to bring the best out of a community, not necessarily by adding just money, but opportunity.
That makes sense. And I feel like with blockchain, many industries, including healthcare, feel the need and the opportunity that they can revolutionize industry with all these technologies. Maybe enthusiasts think that patients will own their own data, doctors will be able to share medical records easier. But then on the other side, we have people who might think that there's still a few blind spots to make this effective and to reach mass adoption.
Absolutely. And I think, at least the way I think about it, and I'm not saying I'm an expert in this field, but just the practical side of it for me is that it's not about blockchain reinventing industry. I don't think that's true. I don't think, for example, DAOs are companies. They shouldn't be companies because companies require leadership and founders. So I really think what blockchain offers is a really sophisticated way of keeping track and of accountability and transparency of all transactions in a highly secure way. And then that, in turn, can fuel acceleration of for-profit, centralized companies. So that if you put that together as a hybrid model, you now have a powerful approach that's not relying on venture capitalists making 10x. It's actually relying on people supporting what they need and getting back a 2x and being happy with that. And then, of course, the most important part of this is that it's the community that gains that 2x. It's not the individual member of the DAO. It's about actually forming a community together and getting the gain back to the community, not to the individual. And I think the best thing that could happen is that people stop thinking about making individual gains from crypto and blockchain. They should be making individual gains from creating a great for-profit company where they're passionate about it and they're doing something good and there's a value attached to it. But as soon as people start thinking they're just going to make money from blockchain and coin trading, I mean, that's okay if that's what you do, but it's not really what gets me excited and gets me out of bed every morning.
Yeah. And usually communities are this group of people that share culture, but most of the time communities also share a physical location. They live together. But with these technologies, that could change. Like you can have virtual communities. What do you think about that? Is it harder to build a virtual community?
Well, I'm showing my age now, but one of my favorite songwriters was John Lennon, and he wrote a little song called "Imagine" that kind of picked up. It was pretty popular back in my time. That was it. I hate to be corny here, but man. There is no borders with blockchain, and just imagine if the world could be all one, right? One DAO, where we have our own treasury and we all vote on it and we all solve the problems that need to be solved in this world. That's a dream.
That's the goal.
But John was like that. Maybe I'm a little bit like that too. I believe there is definitely, I'm an optimist. I think people just have to realize that it's in their control. It's in their power. Everybody goes out and spends $100 on a dinner, like pretty regularly, and I don't think anybody would miss that dinner, and that's what we're really thinking about here. Is putting in $100 to a DAO and being a member, and if millions of people do that, you have a huge treasury.
Yeah, that's true. And you mentioned transparency earlier. And I feel like there's been a lot of talk recently, especially with COVID, about how supply chains are so vulnerable in the healthcare industry and pharmaceutical industry. How can we improve that whole process so that not only we can reach these communities physically and emerging markets, but so that it's also transparent and you can rely on it and not be so maybe easier to stumble upon issues in any supply chain.
Yeah, exactly. It's a huge problem in supply chains, but I think, again, accountability is the big word here. Like, how do you hold people accountable to what they promise? And that is literally what I've been working on recently, to try to find out how a DAO organization can be safe from bad actors. And I think there are definitely ways to do that. I don't know specifically right now how that will happen, but I believe it will. But I think the most important thing is to make sure that the people that are executing on this work are for-profit. Because, to be quite frank, if you're a for-profit company and you do a really lousy job, you're not going to get another contract. And you're going to care about that because your whole entire livelihood depends on you getting that next contract. I can attest for that. But if you're a not-for-profit, well, we did our best, and we still have our jobs administratively. And I think that's what I'm talking about here, is like trying to reduce the administrative load while having for-profit companies step up and make sure we get those supply chains sorted, because we have an incentive to do it, and I'm going to make money if I do it. And that's really important because, honestly, money is a driver of innovation. And I'm a huge fan of that fact.
What would you say is your everyday motivation? What keeps you working on what you work?
Yeah, I'll make a joke here and say it was my subconscious, so I don't even know. That's what Lee Hartwell once told me. But it is hard sometimes. I'm not kidding. But the reality is that I'm a scientist at the core. And about 10 years ago, I thought of an idea in my dreams, in my subconscious, that turned out to work in a profound way. And I am completely driven by that concept in my head that I've now made into practice. And it's not to be a little corny here, it's sort of like my artwork, right? And so I'm never going to stop painting. I mean, that's what I do. And so this science that we created as a team, which included Lee and Corey Nislo and a few other really amazing people, is our baby. And we proved it can help rapidly find drugs for people that need them during a crisis like a pandemic. It's been hard to get those things through, and that's what, I get up every morning trying to figure out the best way to do that. But that's what keeps me going, is that the science I know is real, it works, and it's not necessarily 100% appreciated by Big Pharma because it's not part of their game plan, but it would really help people get drugs they need at a much lower cost. And I think that's really important.
Where do you see the industry in about 5 years?
The industry of what?
Healthcare, in general.
Well, that's a pretty loaded question. Healthcare is a nightmare for the most part. I mean, it is really complicated. But I do think, once again, from my perspective, I'm more on the ground trying to just find the medications that I need. Once you get to the medication point, you've discovered something. It's a nightmare to move that through FDA, get that to the market, and get healthcare providers to pay for it. The biggest payer is government, of course, and so that's where our focus has always been. We work with government, and we have to, because they're the biggest DAO in town, right? So, but healthcare, I think, will ultimately be driven by innovation in the for-profit world, and I think that's okay. Records are a mess, but it's just not an area I'm a specialist on. But I think everything starts with a small step. So if I do my step, which is find medications, and if I do, there should be a way to find a way to get those to patients. And then we'll just figure it out as we get to that point. There are mechanisms to do it. It's just that they're not as, they're pretty bureaucratic and difficult. But hopefully that'll get better.
It is a very bureaucratic process industry, but as we experience faster changings in everywhere, and as we have new technologies emerging all the time, do you think this process might be less bureaucratic? It might get simpler?
Absolutely. I mean, I think blockchain can play a huge role. You mentioned about data management with blockchain. Absolutely. I mean, that, I'm not a blockchain expert, but clearly having a more reliable system for keeping track of records would be welcomed by everyone, I'm sure. For example, even in our own projection of our DAO, we suspect there'll be a Discord of some type with members that can talk about the 4 essentials of life. And just from that alone, the data generated from chats regarding somebody finding water technology somewhere that looked promising, or I can imagine that just being an amazing source of information from a citizen level that then scientists could actually look at and explore on the side as a member of the DAO and get access to that type of Discord, right? So all these things will feed on each other. And I think that's what I'm really excited about. It's not just getting a bunch of money and finding some for-profit companies to deliver water and medicine, but actually getting money that supports a community, that has a Discord, that there's information within the Discord, like a Facebook kind of thing, where you get information that's valuable, and that gets released to the people that can actually take it and make a difference. That to me is really exciting, because if millions of people are in there, that's like an amazing amount of information, right? So, and they can own it. The DAO could literally manage that and maybe even sell it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
And finally, so you mentioned education earlier on our talk. You mentioned education.
Yes.
And I think it's very important
Yes.
to anyone, anywhere, independently of where you come from, how old you are, what you want to dedicate your life to. So if you were to give an advice from your experience and educate people in this arena, what would you say?
Well, that's a great topic for me, because I've trained a lot of students and doctors, and I've taught for over 3 decades. But I'm going to go and give you a little story about my friend Lee Hartwell, because Lee Hartwell, after being the director of the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center in Seattle for 14 years and building it to be one of the top cancer centers in the world, retired and didn't stop. He went to education. And he went to education in a way that nobody expected. He tried to figure out where is the most important place to educate. Where's the biggest bang for your buck in education? And he researched it for about a year, and his conclusion was kindergarten through 8.
Oh, I did not expect that.
It's fascinating what he was able to do. And then he went on, before Zooms or anything, he built a virtual education course for his students at ASU, at Arizona State University. And it's the most beautiful set of videos I've ever seen to educate people on the basics of life, basics of sustainability. And he's using that as a tool to educate people around the world in this lower age bracket, because he feels that's where it's most important. It's not to say it's not important to educate high schoolers or whatever, but the biggest bang for your buck, getting them when they're most open-minded, is when a kid is like K through 8.
Absolutely makes sense.
And yeah, it really does. And so my gift to Lee would be, if I can get this resonating with people around the world, and we actually have an opportunity to grow a DAO of some kind as a group. It's not my DAO, it's everyone's DAO. That if we can provide all the essentials that people need to live, and that's starting with our conversation 10 years ago, maybe the next step would be, wow, we can educate, right? Like we can literally go and educate, because they're not hungry. They're not thinking about other things. And then what would happen then if we just took people that were so disenfranchised, all of a sudden they have an opportunity to educate? And that's where I think Lee's program would be absolutely scalable. and he's pretty low key, so he's not like out here talking like I do, but bringing his educational tools to the world, which I know he's doing in Tunisia and a couple other places, but doing it worldwide, it's economical.
It would have a great impact.
And it would have enormous impact on the world. And so I owe it to him, because he's always helped me, to help him try to move that forward. And he has got a great team.
That's amazing. Well, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome, and it was great having a chat with you.
Thank you, you too.
All right, perfect.